He stood alone near the edge of the SEAL training compound. Just an old man in a flannel shirt, worn boots, and a cap so faded you couldn't read the stitching. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just watched as recruits crawled through mud, scaled walls, shouted under pressure. Most assumed he was no one, a retired janitor, a local who wandered too close. No one gave him more than a glance until one recruit slowed down. He had noticed something under the old man's rolled-up sleeve, a faded tattoo. Nothing decorative, just a trident. Sharp, precise. The kind of mark you don't choose, the kind you earn. And in that moment, the recruit stopped cold. Because that man wasn't lost. He wasn't out of place. He was one of them, long before any of them were even born. He came every Thursday, always alone, always early. Before the instructors arrived, before the cadences started echoing through the compound, before anyone had time to ask questions. He parked in the dirt lot just past the perimeter fence, stepped out of a rusted Ford pickup that looked older than half the recruits, and walked with a steady limp toward the far edge of the field. He never crossed the training line, never interfered. He'd stand there, arms crossed, one boot slightly turned inward, like it had been broken, and never reset right. From a distance, he looked like a curious local. Maybe someone with time to kill. But anyone who watched close enough would notice the way he tracked each movement on the course, how his eyes narrowed when someone dropped their rifle on the low crawl, how his shoulders stiffened slightly at every misstep in formation. Not judgment. Muscle memory. The younger recruits never paid him much attention. The older ones joked that he came for nostalgia, maybe even guilt, but the instructors knew. Not who he was exactly, but what he represented. None of them dared to ask, and none of them told him to leave. Because in places like this, respect isn't spoken. It's recognized, and whatever he had done, it had earned him the right to stand there without explanation. He never wore anything that gave him away. No medals, no branch patches, just that same faded cap and flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. But every now and then, during a breeze or a stretch, part of the ink on his left forearm would show. Most thought it was just age-worn skin. But one day, one recruit looked closer, noticed the shape, the pattern. The symbol burned into faded flesh, and it wasn't decorative. It was a SEAL trident. And not just any version. The old design, the kind awarded long before slogans and documentaries. The kind that meant something only to those who knew where it came from and what it had cost. That afternoon, the heat clung low over the compound like a second skin. The echo of instructors shouting through bullhorns blended with the dry thuds of boots hitting dirt, with metal dragging and bodies grinding against gravel. Recruits pushed themselves until their arms trembled and vision blurred. Their movements reduced to instinct and stubbornness. But Myers, one of the youngest in his unit, wasn't just watching the drills. He was watching him again. The old man stood exactly where he always did, just outside the perimeter fence, leaning against a rusted post, arms folded, motionless. He didn't carry a clipboard, didn't wear a uniform, didn't speak. To most, he was just a ghost, a harmless relic of some forgotten assignment. Maybe a local, maybe a janitor, maybe nothing at all. But Myers had started noticing the small things. The way the man's gaze tracked specific recruits, not just aimlessly. The way his head tilted subtly, measuring stances, predicting mistakes before they happened. The way his body didn't fidget or shift, as if he'd been standing still under pressure longer than anyone else here had been alive. That's when it happened. A gust of dry wind rolled through the compound, lifting dust and shirt sleeves alike. And for a brief moment, the old man's rolled cuff lifted just high enough for Myers to catch a glimpse of something on his forearm. Ink, old, faded, almost camouflaged into the leathery tone of his skin. A trident. Not stylized, not oversized, just quiet, precise, the kind of mark you didn't buy. The kind you didn't even talk about unless you'd earned it the hard way. Myers didn't react immediately. But something shifted in his spine, in his gut, like his body recognized what his brain hadn't caught up to yet. That wasn't just a bystander. That wasn't just some forgotten vet with stories to tell. That was someone who had walked the line long before any of them had ever put on boots. Later, after the day's exercises ended and the instructors dispersed, Myers found himself walking along the gravel behind the main training center, close to the old pickup parked just beyond the fence. The man was still there, pouring the last of his coffee from a dented thermos, staring across the now empty course. Myers didn't speak. He didn't approach too close. He just stood there for a moment, at a respectful distance, unsure why his legs had brought him here at all. The old man didn't acknowledge him. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried weight, the kind of weight that doesn't demand space. It earns it. Eventually, the man stood, not with a groan, not with effort, just a deliberate shift of balance, like he was still conserving energy for something that might come. He glanced once toward Myers. No nod, no smirk, just a look. Brief, measuring. Then he stepped into the truck, closed the door softly, and drove away down the dusty path, tires crunching gravel in a rhythm slower than the drills, but heavier somehow. Myers stood there long after he was gone, the last golden edge of sun catching the top of the flagpole behind him. He didn't know why the man came every week. He didn't know what he'd done or where. But he knew one thing without a doubt. That man had earned the silence everyone else took for granted. That night, Myers couldn't sleep. His body ached from drills. His mind throbbed from dehydration. But it wasn't exhaustion keeping him awake. It was the image, that tattoo, that glance, that silence. He'd seen men bluff their way through in online videos, flexing fake patches and scripted lines. But nothing about this man felt rehearsed. In fact, the most unsettling part was how little he said, how nothing about him asked to be noticed, and yet everything about him demanded respect. Around 2:00 a.m., Myers rolled out of his bunk, careful not to wake the others. He moved to the corner console in the rec room where he could grab a few minutes of Wi-Fi and quiet. He opened his laptop, eyes stinging, hands still dusty from the day's sand pit crawl. He didn't even know what to search. Old SEAL veteran. Tattoo. Training compound. Nothing. He tried narrowing it down. Looked through recent visitor logs, then old base access records. Most were redacted or locked behind clearance, but something caught his attention. A field entry from 2 years ago, T. Harrow, retired, authorized visitor, non-instructional. He clicked through the entry. No photo, no contact info, but under remarks, a single line. Cleared for silent observation, no engagement. Myers blinked. That wasn't normal. No one got that kind of access without a reason. Certainly not civilians. And yet there it was, renewed annually. No expiration, no formal title, just permission to be present without needing to explain why. He dug deeper. The name Harrow turned up once more, buried in an old debrief note from a 2003 training overhaul memo. It mentioned a retired SOT-1 Harrow consulted during a revision of SEAL readiness protocols, described as a foundational operator from early deep recon doctrine. No service number listed, no deployments, no rank confirmations. And then, further down, one reference in a dusty oral history project, long forgotten. No transcript, just metadata. SEAL Team 2, 1970, Lowe's, deep penetration. No records filed. Debrief denied. Outcome classified. Harrow, T listed as field lead. Myers leaned back in his chair. Lowe's. Back then, that wasn't even supposed to exist. Those operations weren't written down. They weren't acknowledged, but they happened. And the men who survived them, if they came back at all, were ghosts buried behind redactions, swallowed by silence. He closed the laptop slowly. No triumph, no breakthrough, just a deepening weight in his chest. Whoever this man was, he hadn't come to be remembered. He'd come to watch, because some warriors don't return to relive the past. They return to see if the next generation is ready to carry what they did. And suddenly, Myers wasn't sure he was. He came back that Thursday, just like the last. Same truck, same thermos, same quiet stance along the fence line. Nothing in his demeanor had changed, but something in the air had. Myers felt it the moment training began. The instructors were sharper, the cadence somehow quieter, like a tension had settled over the compound. And it wasn't about the drills. It was about him, the old man. He stood still as ever, arms folded, cap shadowing his eyes, watching as they crawled through grit and sweat. But this time, he wasn't invisible. It started small. One instructor, a senior petty officer with a silver star tucked deep into his record, slowed during a march rotation. He glanced toward the old man and froze, not out of confusion, but with the recognition of someone who had seen a ghost. He didn't call attention to it. He just stared for a long moment, then moved on, quieter than before. Later in the day, during rope ascent drills, 2 more instructors stopped near the observation line, their eyes lingering. No words exchanged, just something unspoken passing between them, like old signals from a different war. By late afternoon, the compound had quieted. Most of the recruits were already inside, exhausted, half asleep on benches or dragging their gear back to bunks, but Myers remained. He stood near the edge of the field, sweat crusted to his skin, breath ragged, heart still pulsing from the last run. And across the dirt, the old man still stood, still watching. No camera, no clipboard, just presence. Then it happened. One of the instructors, a man who never broke posture, never deviated from the schedule, walked toward the fence. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He simply stopped 10 feet from the old man and stood at attention, full, perfect, textbook posture. Seconds later, another instructor joined him. Then a third, then more. One by one, they stood in a silent line across the compound, facing the man who had never asked to be seen. No command was given, no gesture. It just happened, as if something buried had been uncovered, and the only thing left to do was stand for it. Myers watched from a distance, feeling something deep in his chest tighten. Not from awe, not from confusion, but from understanding. Because in that moment, no one cared about scores or ranks or qualifications. They stood because they knew, because his silence had weight, because the ink on his arm meant more than most of their ribbons ever would. When the old man finally turned toward his truck, no one moved. As he opened the door, one voice broke the silence, calm, grounded, unmistakable. It was the Master Chief. "Sir," he said, not with command but with respect, "would you consider speaking to the recruits next week?" The old man paused, 1 foot already in the cab. He looked back only slightly, voice low and final. Nothing to say. And then he left. No fanfare, no thanks, just the soft crunch of gravel under tires, and a trail of dust that settled slowly behind him. But long after he disappeared, the instructors remained standing. Not because they were told to, but because some men never need to explain who they are. You see it in how others rise when they appear. The compound returned to normal over the next few days, at least on the surface. The drills resumed. The yelling picked back up, and the recruits went back to counting reps, miles, and bruises. But something beneath the surface had shifted. Those who had seen what happened that Thursday didn't forget it. They didn't talk about it either. They just carried it quietly. Myers felt it most. The silence from the old man lingered with him in the locker room, in the obstacle lanes, in the way he now triple-checked his posture and watched the instructors more carefully than before. And it wasn't just reverence, it was responsibility. That tattoo, that stare, the weight of history pressed into skin and silence. It had changed something in him. He couldn't shake the need to do something, not to celebrate the man, not to expose him, but to acknowledge him. He brought it up one night after lights out, speaking just above a whisper to 2 teammates who'd stood near the fence that day. "We should mark that spot," he said. "Lane 4, the fence line." They didn't laugh. They didn't ask why. One of them just replied, "How?" They kept it quiet. No announcement, no permission, just action. A few nights later, under cover of darkness, they returned to the observation post with a brass plate, small enough to fit in a palm, polished by hand. They bolted it carefully to the inside of the fence, just above eye level. Nothing flashy, no rank, no name, no dates, just a few engraved words, reserved until he says otherwise. No one outside the unit noticed. No one was meant to. It wasn't a memorial. It was a placeholder for presence, for memory, for everything the old man had carried without asking to be seen. The following Thursday, he came back, right on time. Same boots, same jacket, same thermos in hand. He walked past the trucks, past the field, and paused just briefly as his eyes met the new plaque. He didn't touch it, didn't react. He simply looked, then turned back toward the course, leaned against the same post as always, and resumed watching. But this time, something was different. This time, every recruit who passed near the fence line straightened their back, because even if they didn't know who he was, they felt what he represented. And that was enough. It wasn't until weeks later that anyone learned his name. He didn't offer it. He never wore it. But word has a way of drifting when the silence is respected. One of the instructors, a former team leader from an older generation, recognized the tattoo, not from books, not from history, but from a face in a grainy photo sealed inside a file few ever read. The name attached to it was Thomas Harrow, S1, SEAL Team 2. Confirmed for operations that never made it past whispered conversations. No public commendations, no medals on record, only a handful of men still alive who remembered what he did, and fewer still who dared to speak of it. Harrow kept coming every Thursday, never missed, never asked for anything, and every time he stood at the fence, more and more recruits began to notice. They didn't talk, they didn't gawk. They just watched from the corners of their eyes, straightened their lines, tightened their stances. Not because someone told them to, but because presence teaches louder than orders. One morning, he didn't come. No announcement, no explanation, just an empty spot along the fence line. They waited. One Thursday, then two, then a month. The plaque stayed. So did the silence. Eventually, Myers, now in the final phase of his training, returned alone to Lane 4 after hours. The compound was still. The air was thick with that unique tension between nightfall and memory. He stood where Harrow used to stand, arms folded, gaze fixed on the course. It wasn't the same, but it was something, a ritual of respect, a way to say thank you without saying anything. When he turned to leave, he noticed something taped gently to the back of the plaque, a folded envelope, weather-worn, his name on it, just Myers. No rank, no title. Inside was a single coin, old, heavy, scratched by time. One side carried the trident, the other bore no words, just a single hand-etched line. Still watching. He never found out who left it. No one claimed to know, but he didn't need confirmation. Because some men never disappear. They just fade quietly into the lives they shaped, leaving behind nothing but discipline, silence, and the kind of example that speaks long after they're gone. Some warriors leave behind medals. Some leave behind books. But the rarest ones, the ones we almost miss, leave behind nothing but presence. They don't speak often. They don't correct the record. They just watch silently to see if we've learned anything at all. Thomas Harrow never asked to be remembered. He never told his story. But the silence he left behind taught an entire generation how to listen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community, where we celebrate quiet strength, real struggles, and unexpected victories. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.